Hi, Maria. It's Caroline. I wanted to give you an update on biogas experiences in California. As you know, California claims to be one of the leaders in addressing climate change. But in their quest to deal with greenhouse gas emissions, the state has often overlooked the experience of low-income communities and communities of color in the selections it makes in terms of policy choices. And that's no different in the case of biogas. So the area where I work in California in the San Joaquin Valley is home to a number of large-scale agricultural dairy CAFOs, or confined animal feeding operations. They're large industrialized dairies, and they produce a lot of methane, both from the cows themselves as well as from the manure lagoons where the dairy waste goes. And one of California's solutions has been to tarp those manure lagoons and flare off or burn or combust methane to produce energy. And the idea is that this biogas is a renewable energy that can solve California's global warming problems. Unfortunately, that's just not true. The communities that live closest to the facilities still experience the same odor, the same fly issues, the same localized air pollution issues. In fact, the technology to produce the energy, the dairy digesters, actually have their own emissions in the form of NOx and other local health-harming pollutants. It also doesn't do anything really to address the overall wastewater problems from dairies or the over-application of manure on fields. And so all of those issues still exist. They're not dealt with at all by the biogas, the sort of move to biogas and addressing greenhouse gas emissions. The other thing that's been really clear in California is that the installation of dairy digesters has been incentivized by public money, often through the cap and trade trading program. And we hear increasing reports of how the digesters may receive millions of dollars in funding, but they're not installed or they're not operational for very long. Maybe they'll come online for a period of months or a period of years, or a period of a year, but very often not beyond that. The anecdotal evidence in California is that dairies are profiting from the public investments, but the public isn't really seeing the benefit of those investments. There's no real long-term enforcement to make sure that the dairy digesters are installed or functional or operational. And that means that we're still experiencing the same levels of greenhouse gas emissions from methane, as well as all of the local impacts. So it's really not a solution to the climate crisis. It's not a solution to local air impacts. And it just perpetuates the same imbalances in terms of our agricultural system.
Ladies and gentlemen.
Good afternoon. Welcome back to SRAP Live. My name's Maria Payan, and we are going to explore a panel today, which is going to deal with solutions and the Farm System Reform Act. This legislation is a solution for our broken industrial agricultural system. It is for both farmers as well as communities. We're going to break away to a clip with Senator Cory Booker, Senator Elizabeth Warren, and Representative Ro Khanna. From there, we're going to turn it over to Rebecca Wolf from Food and Water Watch, who will be our moderator for this fantastic session dealing with solutions.
The COVID-19 pandemic has further exposed many of the injustices going on within our nation. And one of them has been our deeply broken food system.
For years, regulators looked the other way while giant multinational corporations crushed competition in the agriculture sector and seized control over key markets.
This has allowed our farm system to get so consolidated that a few companies control the vast majority of the food we eat. This has hurt farmers by putting less money in their pockets. It's hurt consumers by giving us less choice. And it's hurt workers by giving them less bargaining power and leverage.
These massive multinational corporations have corrupted, have perverted our food systems, leaving farmers with really often only one buyer to sell their crops or animals, eviscerating their negotiating power.
These companies exploit workers by crowding them into meatpacking plants that have become hotbeds for COVID-19 outbreaks.
These large companies squeeze more and more animals into awful conditions in factory farms. These conditions hurt our environment. They are a threat to the health and well-being of the communities where so many people live, often low-income folks.
And the COVID-19 pandemic has not only exposed vulnerabilities in our hyper-concentrated farm economy, this crisis will make it easier for big ag to get even bigger, to gobble up smaller farms, and will lead to fewer choices for consumers.
We must fix this broken system now, and that means holding accountable these large corporate integrators, holding them accountable for the harm that they are causing.
Americans deserve to have a food system that is secure and healthy. Farmers deserve to earn a fair price for what they produce, and farm workers and food chain workers deserve safe places to work. We need to attack this consolidation head on and give workers and farmers and consumers bargaining power in our farm and food system.
We need to invest in a new system that prioritizes farmers, that prioritizes local food hubs and local farmers markets so we can be more nutritious, so we can have more choice for consumers, so that we can have a more stable and secure food supply.
We cannot go back to business as usual. We can create a more just future, a better future, and we can start by passing the Farm System Reform Act. I wrote the bill last year, and I'm proud to now be joined by Senator Elizabeth Warren and Congressman Ro Khanna. Our bill would fight to protect independent family farmers and food systems, making local food systems more robust. And it would begin to phase out the big factory farms.
The Farm System Reform Act would massively reform this broken system by, among other things, cracking down on the monopolistic practices of multinational meat packers and corporate integrators.
That's why this bill calls for a moratorium on new large factory farms and invests instead in American farmers and in a sustainable food system.
Our bill would hold corporate integrators responsible for the harm that they are causing.
Now, if you agree with us that large factory farms are harmful to rural communities, harmful to public health, and harmful to the environment, and that Congress should do something about it, then share this video.
Share this video. We need everyone in this fight.
Thank you, Maria. So like Maria said, I am Rebecca Wolf. I am a senior organizer with Food and Water Watch, and I work to pass the Farm System Reform Act, as well as work with our local teams and stop the build out of factory farm biogas. And I'm really excited to be chatting here with all of my friends today about the Farm System Reform Act. I'm roughly going to kind of set the stage and give you a little bit of an overview of the bill and why we're all here, and then I will pass it to my friends to share more. So I think we're all here today because we know something is wrong with industrial agriculture and factory farms. We see agribusiness all the time. They claim that this current food system that we have with factory farms, extreme levels of concentration, they say it's necessary to keep everyone fed. But we saw in the coronavirus pandemic, and we're still seeing, that it's really destroyed that carefully crafted narrative that they have. We see that this highly consolidated industrial food system actually harms our neighbors, harms farmers, harms animals and the environment, and is in fact less resilient than a regional diversified system. So we know that we need smaller, more diverse crop and livestock systems and regional food systems. And we have a federal bill called the Farm System Reform Act as our roadmap. And we're really proud of this robust legislation and really grateful to the leadership of Senator Cory Booker for introducing it in the Senate and Representative Ro Khanna for introducing it in the House of Representatives. We now have 3 Senate co-sponsors, and we have a number of House co-sponsors, and they continue to join all the time. And I think each of us today brings a really unique perspective to the issue, to the Farm System Reform Act, and what the bill really tackles. So just briefly, we really believe that this legislation will revitalize independent family farm agriculture and our rural communities. It first will place a moratorium on new and expanding large CAFOs or factory farms. It will phase out existing large factory farms, again, or CAFOs, by 2040. It will transition this factory farm operations and contract growers into diversified operations that serve regional markets. And this assistance would be available to operators who raise pasture-based livestock, to grow food crops, and to grow organic commodity crops. It would also do a number of things that restore the market, like restore the Packers and Stockyard Act, restore country of origin labeling, and really hold integrators like Smithfield Foods responsible for the waste that they produce. So it really does a lot, and there's good reason that we're sitting here all today in this room. I'll introduce everyone as we go around, but there's a really broad coalition of groups, 300 groups that support this bill. We have farm groups, we have farmers unions, we have a number of animal advocacy organizations, environmental groups, social justice groups. So it's a really broad coalition, and I think this is a really great group to kind of share more about all of that with you. First, we're going to start with Monica Brooks, and Monica is a community leader in Salisbury on the eastern shore of Maryland, and she successfully beat a factory farmer CAFO in her neighborhood. So, Monica, can you get us started and share a little bit about that experience and how you won it and how you think that kind of relates to how we're all here today for the Farm System Reform Act?
Absolutely. Thank you for allowing me to be here. So in my community, we discovered that 13 football-sized field lowland CAFOs were going to be placed close to our home. We're all on well water, and this proposed project was going to be placed right on top of what's called the Paleo Channel. That is actually our source of water. It's a shallow aquifer. So just finding out that these huge farms were going to be placed near our home, we went and tried to fight it. We thought we would instantly get understanding, considering it was on top of the Paleo Channel. I'm going to be placed on top of the Paleo Channel from our local officials, and we did not get any help. So we ended up getting allies from different groups, Food and Water Watch, SRAP, Socially Responsible Agriculture Project, ACT, Aztec Coastal Trust. Different people came alongside of us and helped us to not only get people on board in the community, but also to fight against this project. It took us a couple of years, but we came out victorious. And honestly, if we had something like the Farm System Reform Act, certainly this project would have never been allowed to even get as close as it was. And we wouldn't have had to fight so hard to protect our air and our water, to keep our families safe. So this kind of legislation for me not only is protecting families, but also it's a win for farmers. Our farmers are not here necessarily in a position to just go on their own and get the funding that they desire. Locally, if they want to get funding, they have to have a contract with an integrator. So diversified farming would be opened back up again for our rural communities. And as a result, not only is it going to give us regional control, but that's also an opportunity for our economy to thrive as well. So farmers can actually get the money that they deserve to make the wages that they deserve and not be kept under the thumb of big agriculture.
Thank you, Monica. So now I'm going to pass it to Kara Shannon, and she's the Senior Manager of the Farm Animal Welfare Program at the American Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, or ASPCA. Kara, there are a lot of groups that support this bill, animal advocacy groups, and can you tell us a little bit about why you think so many groups support the Farm System Reform Act, and what does the Farm System Reform Act mean for animals?
Sure. Thank you, Rebecca. And again, really excited to be here with this great group of people. I think first off, to address your first question, why the FSRA and why it has such broad support among really pretty much every major animal advocacy group out there. I think there's a couple of reasons, but I think, at its heart is, of course, that no matter, what your stance, animal rights, animal welfare, anything in between, everyone really agrees that factory farming has to go. I think that the scale of suffering that occurs on factory farms is truly, it's unimaginable in its scope. So any efforts that are going to reduce that suffering, like the FSRA, are going to get support from really all corners of animal advocacy. And the suffering that occurs on factory farms isn't just limited to animals, which I think we've seen, and it's been particularly highlighted during this pandemic. Over 200 slaughterhouse workers have died from COVID just thus far. And what has been truly a stunning, even for this factory farm industry, which I think we'll probably all go on to talk about, is often kind of dismissing the needs of all of its stakeholders. It's still truly a stunning what we've seen, a dismissal of the needs and the rights of workers in animal agriculture. So I think that the urgency of all of these issues that's been created by the pandemic really united the movement, including animal welfare organizations, and made forward-looking solutions like the FSRA all the more appealing and frankly, all the more necessary. And in addition, I think the FSRA does more than just phase out large CAFOs, which in itself would be a huge win for the animal movement because it's responsible for such a large portion of factory farm suffering. But it's also funding that critical transition to a more humane food system by helping farmers transition either to pasture-based types of farming or even out of raising animals entirely, going towards those food crops, specialty crops, which is, I think, a big draw even more for some of those more perhaps animal rights leaning groups who have become increasingly focused on supporting that transition to plant-based proteins and getting contract growers into alternative crop production. And then to swing back, to kind of the importance of the FSRA and what vertically integrated factory farming means for farm animals. When we talk about factory farming, we're talking about a system that determines how almost 10 billion animals live and die each year in this country alone. And unfortunately, again, it's a system that's putting efficiency and outputs ahead of basically everything else, which has had incredibly detrimental effects for the welfare of animals. The majority of animals that are raised on factory farms are kept in incredibly crowded and unnatural conditions. Some animals, like laying hens and mother sows, are kept in extremely intensive confinement where they're literally in cages and crates that are so small that they can't even fully extend their limbs or sometimes even turn around. So, most animals raised on a factory farm won't see the sun until the day that they're loaded on a truck for slaughter. It's a system that isn't focused on welfare, doesn't provide good or natural lives for animals, despite all of the misleading labeling that we see that's often placed on those products. And right now, those misleading products are what make up the vast majority of what's in grocery stores because factory farms are raising the vast majority of animals in this country. So, we're really focused on this transition away from factory farming towards a model of raising animals that's higher welfare, ideally that has animals outdoors where they can truly act like animals and carry out their natural behaviors, which they're denied on factory farms.
Thank you. Yeah, I really see the picture, and I'll speak to this in a moment, but the picture of consolidation at the supermarket, really the way that you put that really reminds me that we have just a few players really controlling and making all these decisions. which I think you were going to share some polling, and then we'll ask Jake to comment on that as well and kind of transition us toward that direction. But can you share that polling with us?
Yeah, definitely. So again, as I touched upon, I think this pandemic has played a big role in highlighting a lot of the issues in industrial animal agriculture that maybe weren't necessarily mainstream until now, that the average, U.S. consumer wouldn't necessarily know about. And the ASPCA was really interested in that. So we did some polling that we released just a couple of weeks ago to try and better understand how the pandemic was affecting people's attitudes towards industrial animal agriculture, and particularly what kind of support there is out there for the types of reforms that we are talking about in the FSRA. So that poll surveyed 1,000 adults across the U.S., in different regions, different political backgrounds, racial backgrounds, really trying to get a broad swath of the population. And ultimately, we found a number of encouraging things. The first is that the public is widely concerned about industrial animal agriculture. 89% of respondents cited concern about at least one issue in industrial animal agriculture, whether that's animal welfare, worker safety, the health of rural communities. So we know that people are concerned. And again, that's almost 90%. That's a huge amount. And the second big thing is that there really is strong bipartisan support for government intervention to try and reform animal agriculture. Specifically, we found that 61% of respondents support prioritizing funding for more humane, healthier types of farming, which is, of course, one of the parts of the FSRA, is getting that funding to farmers to help them make that transition. And then finally, one of the kind of key takeaway findings we had from this poll was that farmers and those who have family ties to agriculture have both the highest levels of concern about industrial agriculture, and they're also more supportive of reform, including much, much more supportive of a complete ban on new industrial animal agriculture facilities. So 85% of farmers or those who have some kind of tie to agriculture reported support for that complete ban. And that was almost twice the amount of support that the general public reported, which was just under 50%. So it's clear that farmers and those that have that kind of firsthand knowledge of industrial agriculture and all the issues that go along with it are extremely aware of the problems, concerned about it, and really, supportive of that change. So it's so important that there are groups like Family Farm Action and like Jake who are working with farmers and bringing them into this fight to improve the farm system.
I think you just built a perfect segue for Jake to share more, but those are really striking numbers. And Jake, can you comment on that? Jake is a senior policy advisor at Family Farm Action Alliance, who was instrumental in helping get together the Farm System Reform Act and does a lot of wonderful work in sustainable agriculture and with farmers.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. And great industry itself has become highly consolidated. We start with a pillar, for example, that was mentioned earlier around strengthening and reforming the Packers and Stockyards Act. So, if you get rid of and take control back from the multinational corporations of your food and agriculture system, we can then go forward with a better system. The next thing that we did was invest significantly, so $100 billion over 10 years, to help farmers transition to a system that's offers and meets the values of those people who want to buy the food that those farmers are producing even better. So that's sort of the starting structure. And then we end up with a place where we just need to get rid of this sort of industrial factory farm model so that we can go forward with a better, more sustainable regional food system.
Absolutely. I think that's a perfect segue to play a clip from our friend Craig Watts and share a little bit about farmers stuck in this unfair system.
Well, it would get them out from under the debt. That would be the main thing. That debt makes a man very pliable, and sometimes you do things that are against your own best interest just to keep a contract. It will give them more options other than just to be beholden to a big agriculture corporation.
So tell me a little bit about the debt. Like what kind, like what is the scale of debt that some of these farmers are in? How do they get in that situation in the first place? What does it look like from their point of view?
Well, the thing is that you have to understand the system is the company owns the bird, the company owns the feed, the company owns the processing, the company owns the trucking, the company owns the marketing. The one thing that they do not own is the actual housing that the birds are in, and that's not an accident. There's just no return in it. They figured that out 50 years ago that it's cheaper to talk a farmer into doing it than to do it themselves. What it means is several $100,000 at least of debt for a farmer just to enter into the business for basically a minimum wage job.
And on another side of this issue is the communities that surround these facilities and those farmers. So what exactly could this mean for those communities in rural America?
Well, hopefully the people would take that money and reinvest it back in their farms into more diversified farms, because we know for a fact 25 years ago or 30 years ago, when we had a lot of farmers, a lot of diversified farms, that rural communities did very well. Now, since big ag's come in, there's just a few farmers, most of them under these ridiculous contracts, and rural America is just getting boarded up. So hopefully it'll revitalize our economy, because we're dying out here.
And what exactly does it mean for the environment?
Well, I think the problem with the big things like the big poultry CAFO complexes or hog CAFO complexes is you have such a concentration of waste in such a small area that the land just can't absorb it. So hopefully it'll give the environment a break, and we'll be able to turn back some of the damage that has been done to the soil and to the water.
I think that this is probably the direction we would want to see some of these farmers going if they're lifted from this financial debt. Obviously, we don't want to see them go back into growing chickens in a way that's going to cripple them financially. So, where are the opportunities for them to pivot?
Well, it's the only problem with the poultry houses and the hog houses is they're basically single-use facilities. So you really have to do some creative thinking to do an alternative there. I know some have turned them into growing mushrooms, some raising fish. One guy turned his into a storage unit. So there are things out there that can be done. It just depends on how creative you are. You hope that what can be done will be able something the farmer. Not only will he be able to make a living just to live, he'll have something to live for.
And I guess that you've obviously heard many success stories among the ones you've just mentioned, that this isn't a venture that's unsuccessful. This is the way to go for these farmers.
Well, there's life after chickens. I can vouch for that.
And I'll just chime in here after Craig's clip and the words that you just heard from Jake about how important tackling consolidation with the Farm System Reform Act really is. The stranglehold that these huge multinational corporations like Smithfield and Tyson have on our food and farming system has really devastated far beyond the food that reaches our dinner tables, like Kara's talked about as well. There was a record amount of pork that was shipped to China in April, according to Smithfield export data. And that was the very same month that this company cried wolf about a waning pork supply to the American public. So this highly consolidated food system has really actually left thousands of independent family farmers unable to compete and really push them out of business, as we've been seeing, and even push people off land as well. It's also extracted wealth from our rural communities. I think that's one of the most exciting things that I see too about the Farm System Reform Act, is it keeps that money in communities, which is really, really important, because this model has also caused out-migration from rural places and kind of ruined the quality of life for people who are still living near them or have to live near them, factory farms and slaughter facilities as well. So I actually show this graphic a lot when talking about this, but if you imagine an hourglass, and at the top part represents 2 million farmers, and at the bottom part represents all of us, and it's the 330 million eaters. But if you think about that little middle part of the hourglass, that's the middle part that's squeezed by a few companies. And those companies are making all of the decisions about how animals are raised, how much they cost, what you pay for them at the supermarket, and they've really controlled everything. And Jake talked about this a lot, but I think it's really important to highlight that when we pass the Farm System Reform Act, that really starts to flip the script and change where that money is going and how those decisions are being made. So I think that's also really important to highlight, and one of the big reasons that at Food and Water Watch we're excited about the legislation as well. We see it as something that is really starting to tackle all of the different angles of the problems that we all talk about. So I think with that, I'll segue back to Monica. And Monica, you work at the state and local level on banning factory farms or passing a factory farm moratorium. How have you already seen the interplay of legislators at the local level and at the national level talking about the Farm System Reform Act and building off of each other?
So it became a natural evolution for us in fighting against factory farms to go beyond our local legislators to try to do something bigger, to go to the state level, as Rebecca was just talking about. So what we've seen over the years, initially we had absolutely no support from anyone who wanted to tackle anything going contrary to large integrators. But slowly but surely, over time, even though we continue to get fought against tooth and nail by big agriculture, we're slowly seeing more and more advocates on the state level, even in our local legislators with our local community, who are giving more support to the idea that the system does need to change, that we can still be successful in spite of having these large companies in our backyard and supporting whatever it is that they do. But trying to get moratoriums passed initially for us was hard. But let me tell you, it has been great to bring farmers together with other citizens to fight for justice. This is necessary. The time is now. Actually, the time was a long time ago, but I'm thankful that we now have this opportunity to get this legislation pushed forward, because our rural communities are dying. Just as Rebecca was saying, we need an opportunity for them to make good living wages. And people have a perception that what we're paying in a grocery store or something like that is what the food costs. But no, actually, the farmers are forced to sell their wares at much lower price determined by big agriculture. And so they have to just take whatever they can get and then try to get subsidies that still don't even bring them to the level that they want. And why do they do this? They love farming. They love the land. They love providing food for communities and families. And they want to protect the land that they have many times in several generations. It goes back several generations, but it's hard. So we want to make farming a joy and not just a hardship, and certainly bring money back to our rural communities so that we're thriving again. So I'm happy to be able to fight on any level to bring legislation forth that is going to benefit our community as a whole.
Thank you. And can you I know you can you share a little bit about how we've seen the legislators excited about each other's work? I know you've seen that firsthand, that's kind of injected some excitement back and forth as well.
Yes, it's kind of one of those things where if you think about like an 8th grade school dance, and nobody wants to be the first one out on the dance floor. And so having a few, people stick their necks out along the way to on House in the Senate to be the first ones to get out there and support us has inspired other legislators to go, okay, well, I guess maybe we can go out there too. We can go and and dance too. And it's been great. And when Senator Booker introduced this legislation, it was just kind of wow. And even what he saw from Senator Lamb, just different ones, he was inspired. by what people were doing. And he thought, well, what can I do? What else can I do? He and some other legislators, what can we do to come alongside of them? It's not considered a taboo, I suppose, or, oh, you're against industry. We're not against industry, but every industry needs to be held accountable. So I'm excited to see the legislators just slowly come alongside and join in the conversation and hear the real truth, as opposed to the perceived propaganda that's been out there that we're anti-industry. No, we're not anti-industry. We're pro-farmer, we're pro-community, and we're pro-fairness.
Yeah, what the corporate lobbyists tell them. Absolutely. I think that's a real testament to the story you shared in the beginning about organizing in your very hyper-local community, and the work that you're doing at the state level really helps build and push at the national level and vice versa. It's a really symbiotic relationship of the importance of the work in our states and on the ground, but also pushing the envelope at the federal level as well. So thank you for sharing more about that. I think I'll pivot back to Kara and ask Kara, you kind of shared the data about the polling that you did. And this bill, again, really supports both farmers and animals and transitions us to a system that we all find really important here and is really imperative for us to transition to. Can you speak about why that connection, or the connection to farmers, the environment, all of those things that we've talked about, is really important for ASPCA?
Yeah, absolutely, Rebecca. I think that's maybe sounds like an obvious question to some people, because the two they're clearly intrinsically linked, right? Farmers are the people who are caring for the animals. But I think it's worth pointing out that ultimately a sustainable solution has to be more than just, banning certain practices or certain systems that harm animals. It has to help farmers move towards those higher welfare systems. We want to help get farmers out of the factory farm model, which in its current form really prevents them from making their own decisions about how to raise their animals. And we really want to help them transition to a way of raising animals that they can feel good about and that they can also make a good living from, which is why those funding provisions in the FSRA are so key. But I also think that from our perspective as an animal advocacy organization, it's really important to us to bring animal advocates into these other issues within factory farming. You said it touches on so many different things, from environment to workers' issues to rural communities. And again, to go back to this polling we've done, we found that our animal advocates, people who took this survey and indicated that they were concerned about farm animal welfare, across the board reported higher concern about every other issue in industrial agriculture. So these animal advocates are groups of people that maybe aren't, already involved with organizations that are working on the environmental issues, like with an organization like Food and Water Watch. So we really have an opportunity to bring a whole new set of advocates into this fight against factory farming, who can ultimately be advocating for every single thing that it touches on and not just animals. So that link is really important to make.
That's awesome. I think we covered all of our different communities. I think it's a good time to pivot to our friends in the elections this past November. And Jake, we've seen corporate Democrats that are losing in rural places, and you do a lot of work. Can you speak more to why Dems need to support policy like the Farm System Reform Act and really stop cozying up to corporations?
Yeah, I think it's an important, ASPCA's polling doesn't tell us anything more, right, than the fact that folks support the idea that we need to be transitioning into a more local and regional food system. I think that the COVID-19 pandemic has taught us a lot of lessons about how fragile our food system is. And what we saw in the election is that, folks who were close to corporate agribusiness lost important seats. We can think about folks like Collin Peterson, who was the Democratic chair of the House Agriculture Committee, lost a rural seat and ultimately that has been held for 30 years. And ultimately a strategy of the industrial agriculture organizations and corporations that support industrial livestock production put a lot of money into that race and still lost. So I think it's really important for folks to follow the lead of people like Senator Booker and Rep. Khanna, who have, stepped out and said, we really believe this is the path forward for a more sustainable food system. And I think that, Democrat or Republican folks who can, begin to see that factory farms don't align with the values of rural people. It doesn't align with keeping our water clean and our drinker accessible. It doesn't align with having a good environment to live with. It doesn't align with this idea of being neighborly. Then, those values are going to be the values that ultimately lead whoever will pick up this mantle. And I, again, praise Senator Booker for being one of the first, that there's opportunities in rural America to pick up huge amounts of votes just by standing up and caring for those folks.
I think that's a perfect segue to share a clip from our friend Mike Weaver, who has an example of a better way forward and how he has his farming.
I'm Mike Weaver. I'm a farmer in West Virginia now. I raise beef cattle and industrial hemp for the CBD products. I was formerly raised chickens commercially for a company called Pilgrim's Pride. When I was doing that, I have two huge barns here that I raised them in, and I was raising 90,000 chickens a flock for them. And I was constantly battling with the company to, not just them, but Tyson and several others, because I'm still president of Contract Poultry Growers Association of the Virginias, and we were in constant turmoil with the companies trying to get them to treat farmers fairly, and I got tired of making them rich while they abuse farmers, so I just decided to shut down the chicken operation. I've been a CBD user for almost 3 years now, and I wanted to do something with my buildings because they're still in really good shape, so I thought I'd set them up to raise industrial hemp indoors, and I also purchased the equipment to process it, to extract the oil and make the products and bottle them, and we have them for sale. Our company is called Red Bud Hill Naturals, and you can look it up. It's redbudhillnaturals.com for anybody who might be interested. In the case of poultry, just to give you a little more background on it, the companies come into economically depressed areas like our area right here. Agriculture is about the only industry we have. They lie to farmers about how much revenue they can realize from a poultry operation. To build what I have today costs $1.5 million, and they convince people that they are to borrow against their home and their farm to get that kind of money, and most of them, like me, have to do that. They have collateral on their property, but in order to get that money to build this poultry rearing facility, they have to put their farm and their home in the hock. And once they do, they pretty much got them. Your choices are take what they give you or lose your home and your farm. I've had farmers sitting here at my kitchen table saying, "What am I going to do? Our farm's been in my family for 200 years, and I'm going to lose it." And I'm sitting there crying with them. That's wrong.
Tell you what, Mike, I can't tell you how many stories I've heard like that, and actually how many farmers have taken their lives. Suicide. I mean, this is serious issues that need to be talked about and addressed.
Yeah, it's terrible. It's not just poultry. It's going on in the dairy industry right now. The dairy farmers are dropping like flies. They're being abused by their own cooperatives that they set up, and they've been taken over by corporate America, and they're stealing all the revenue out of the system, and the farmers can't even feed their kids. It's terrible. And I've been advocating on Capitol Hill for about 15 years now for farmers, not just poultry, but everybody. And one of the things I've tried to preach to the young people who are the legislative assistants there, who you usually get to meet with, it's rare that you get to meet a congressman or a senator. But I've been pleading with them to help us stop the demise of the American family farmer. Family farmers care about the environment, they care about the animals, they care about providing good, wholesome food for you to feed your kids. And the giant corporations that are taking over agriculture in this country care about money, period. That's it. So, if young people today want a family farmer raising the food that they're going to feed their kids or grandkids or whoever, it doesn't matter. All of us got to eat. And I think we got to keep the family farmers on the farm. I'm convinced that, history tells us that family farmers are a huge part of what made America as great as it is. And if we lose our family farmers, what's going to happen? It scares me. I don't think we can sustain this country without family farmers and a whole lot of other things too. But like I said, family farmers are what built it, and I don't think it's going to function the way it should without family farmers.
And this bill has done it. I mean, there are over 300 organizations that have signed on, which to me is success just to reach that many people in agreement on a piece of legislation. And I know it addresses a lot of the things that we were never able to address before, especially in terms of contract growers. So tell me a little bit, why do you like this legislation?
Well, I hope it creates a situation where companies, be it poultry or beef or pork or whatever, that are in contracts with farmers are forced to be fair with the farmers. We've begged and pleaded over the years and just tried to appeal to their common sense about the things that they do to take advantage of farmers. And a good example, when you go to the grocery store and pay $4 a pound for chicken, the farmer who spent at least 6 weeks raising that chicken gets 5 cents of that. And that was the way it was in the 19 years that I raised poultry. I never had an increase in pay. They do that because they can. They abuse farmers terribly. So, and another thing about family farmers realizing the revenue from anything is that we spend our money locally. It doesn't go to Wall Street or some investment firm somewhere. We go to the hardware store and buy our hardware, and we buy a new pickup truck or a piece of farm machinery or something locally. It stays here. There's a point I'm trying to make, and that's a huge problem for rural America nationwide. These big corporations are sucking all the revenue out of our rural communities and sending it to Wall Street or wherever. And our rural communities are dying, along with our family farms. It's scary to me, very disappointing.
Awesome. So we talked a lot about a lot of the problems. We just saw this clip from Mike, and we are excited about a better way forward. Well, I want to thank all of you for joining us to talk a little bit more about the Farm System Reform Act. I hope everyone watching learned a little bit something more about the bill and to get involved like we all are. Everyone here is working really hard to pass it. The bill numbers are 3221 for the Senate and 6718. Look them up and call your senators, call your representative, send them an email. If you want to set up a meeting with them, reach out to any of us or Maria for SRAP Live, and we will get in touch and help you work to pass the Farm System Reform Act. And thank you all for joining.
I'm getting more comfortable.
Okay, so here we go. We're going dark.
It came with Mel Gibson. Freedom!
When I could see you. Yeah, that's right. That's right. There you go. All right, good luck, folks.